there. So we've had a lot of requests over the past year or two from families wanting to know about how to teach their child more about diversity, representation, racism, allyship. And so it's such a broad topic. But what I wanted to do here today in a really quick video was share with families some books, some children's books that we either read in our groups or that I would encourage people to have in the home if they can, or borrowing from the library. And so I wanted to grab some book ideas that you could use to teach your children about diversity and representation. The choice of these books is really based on personal experience with my own children, as well as what has come recommended by teachers and other families, in which ones that they found. So my criteria for sort of narrowing down the books was books that people felt sparked the most discussion. And I find a really key piece in that is if the book is engaging enough to have the child pay attention to it. That's sort of the most important piece. You can have a really educationally sound book, but if kids aren't paying attention, then it doesn't do much. So a lot of these books are fun books, great illustrations, and there are ways that you can introduce concepts and ideas to your child. A lot of the times we just read the book the first time, and then the more we go into the books, then that's when I find once my children have absorbed the actual story, then the next few times we read it, they're more likely to ask questions or notice little things about the pictures, about the words, and that's where I really utilize the questions to start conversations. So the books themselves often have quite simple concepts, because when we're talking about children under the age of 5, 6 years old, we're not giving these great big broad subjects, and they can't listen to lecturing. So I try to keep the books really simple, and the more we read the same books over and over, the more questions they have. I noticed my daughter, as she's gotten older, the questions have gotten much more in depth and much more relevant to the topic I'm trying to teach. So know that those questions are coming. What I've done here in this quick presentation is throw out some questions that you might want to ask your child, but again, you can keep it natural and you can just read the books and let them learn the information that's in there without actually having to ask any questions or waiting for them to have their own questions. My quick disclaimer note here is just that there's lots of books out there, and in no way am I saying that you only need to get these ones. But as a parent myself, I know that I rarely have the time to research good books. So you can go to your local library and talk to your librarian. But if you're looking for some recommendations, this is what I've put together. Like I said, both with my own children that I work with. There's also some really great Instagram accounts, and that's sort of where I first learned about these books. So I do a lot of research in terms of just Googling like best children's books on this topic or that topic. But it is quite time consuming. So following Instagram accounts that actually are maybe in the topic of what you're trying to get. There's a great Instagram account. Maybe I'll try to post them after or with the video links to the accounts. But I know there's a really great one called Asian Lit for Kids. And it's all about representing Asian cultures. So books that have prominent characters from Asian cultures that are not offensive or stereotypical. And some of my favorite books I've gotten from that Instagram account. There are blogs, websites, all different things. I think it just depends on what medium you use. I just tend to use Instagram quite a bit as I keep staring down at my phone. I use Instagram quite a bit. So that for me is a great way that I can learn about new resources and books. So why use books to teach about diversity and representation? It's really important for young children to see themselves represented in books. I think that, depending on which culture you come from, we might open up a lot of books and we may see ourselves, but a lot of children may not. My son's 3.5, and he asked me the other day, he's a redhead, and he asked me why none of the other kids in the books have hair like his. It's actually quite rare to find books where a young boy is a redhead. So I just thought, I never thought about that before. And I think regardless of what physical feature we're looking at, I think all kids want to see themselves in the books that they read. For children from the non-dominant culture, it teaches them that they belong and that they're perfect just the way they are. For children who may identify as being part of the dominant culture, these books also help learn help them learn about other cultures, and that they may not otherwise get a chance to learn about. So books are a great way to start conversations with your children, and they can create a safe space for children to ask questions and start conversations. One of the greatest things I love about some of the books I'm going to be showing you is that I often sit with my children and read them when we're alone in a room. And I notice that they don't feel any shame in asking questions. They have questions about the shape of someone's eyes or the color of their skin. And I find that they may not have asked that if they were reading that exact same book in, say, a preschool or daycare setting. So it's also about creating that safe space to ask questions on the spot and know that they can come back to those questions later. So some books about physical differences that I love are Hair Love, Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, Solway. I was just reading Solway with my daughter the other night. It's one of her favorite books, and we've read it, I want to say probably at least 10 times over the past little while. And just recently she asked the question, or at least brought up the concept of one of the parts, Solway, is she doesn't like how dark her skin is. And she doesn't feel beautiful. And so she tries to take an eraser and actually erase some of the darkness out of her skin. And my daughter looked up at me and said something along the lines of, why would she want to do that? Her skin is so beautiful. And I just thought, oh, okay, it took 10 times of reading the book, but she was getting the concepts. And she was asking really insightful questions as to why someone may not like the skin that they're living in. And it explains at the beginning of the book that other kids may have made fun of her or made her feel not beautiful for looking that way. And so that sparked a whole discussion about, not everyone may think that you're beautiful, or maybe they make fun of you regardless of whether or not they actually think you're beautiful. And what does it mean? What does it matter if someone thinks you're beautiful? I think a big part of this book was her own understanding of her own beauty. So questions that if you want to try to prompt your child with some of these books are, have you ever felt bad or embarrassed about the way that you look? Has anyone ever made fun of you or someone else because of the way that you or they look? What did it feel like? How do you think they felt? We really want to start introducing the concept of empathy. Is my 3-year-old son going to be able to answer some of these questions? Probably not, but I like bringing them up because eventually he will be able to answer them. So it's good to start younger. But like I said, sometimes the first few times we read these books, we're just leaving them to grasp the concepts and understand it. A great book that features sort of issues around social and economic status is one called The Paper Kingdom. I absolutely love it. My kids love it. And it's about a young boy whose parents are nighttime janitors at a big corporation building business. And just the one night that the book takes place in, his babysitter falls through, and so he has to go to work with his parents. And he sees how poorly the people treat the space and how little respect they have for the people who have to come in and clean that space. And you also see the other piece of how a young boy's life is influenced by the type of work that his parents do. And so at the end of the book, they talk about, his parents say to him, like, if you become king of the paper kingdom one day, or another business, this is how you need to treat not only your staff, but teaching your staff how they treat other staff members, like the janitors or people who might come and clean the building, and how to respect the physical space and how to respect the jobs of other people. So it's a really great book for teaching lots of different things. Questions that I've come up with that I've asked my kids are, what would you do if you were the king or the queen of the paper kingdom? What would you do the same? What would you do differently? And how would you help those who come in at night to clean? And so one of the responses I got back was that they would teach their people to clean up after themselves, so it doesn't become someone else's job. What's in a name? So these two books are just absolutely beautiful, and they're great books about someone's own name and loving your own name. The name jar, I believe the young girl in there is Korean, and then with Alma, don't actually remember Latino, so I'm sort of hiding it. I don't know if they actually say. But these books are great because Alma in her book has a very long name, and I guess she doesn't like that she can't fit it on the paper. She's got lots of middle names. In the name jar, it's about a little girl who's trying to pick a more English sounding name. And I think in the end, she comes to the conclusion that she just wants to keep her real name, even though it's really hard to pronounce for people. So I think some questions there are, what do you think about your name? Do you know how it was chosen for you, and sharing that story? And having your child understand or take the perspective of, even if there's a child at school or at daycare where you don't know how to say their name or you don't understand their name, think about how much it means, how much your own name means to you and how much their own name means to them. And we talk a lot about how it's really important when we meet other children, and if it's a name my children don't understand, we ask many times how to pronounce it properly and what the name means. And so following up with questions about, how do you feel when someone doesn't say your name properly? And most often they'll say, yeah, I don't really like that. And so we talk about how that might not be great for other children as well for that experience. So it's really important to respect people's names. This book on finding common ground, it's called Same, Same, but Different. It's about two young boys who are pen pals on different sides of the world. And I think some questions you could ask your child is, do you have anyone at your school, preschool, daycare who wasn't born here? Have you ever asked them what their other home is like? And just getting an understanding that not everything is the way it is here. And lots of young children, I get a lot of families coming in saying like, oh, we moved here when I was pregnant or before I had my child or when my child was young, and they have no memory of mom and dad's culture or what it was like for them back home. And so they want to give that feel. And I think this is a great book to introduce that concept of like home can feel very different for different people. Home is in Between. I love this book. I've read it a million times, it feels like. And it's about a young girl who moves from India, I believe, to the United States. And just that feeling that she feels of like she has the back home and then she has the home that she's moved to, and what it's like living between cultures. And I think at one point one of the children brings up playing baseball or t-ball, and she has no idea what it is. And it makes her feel really upset because she doesn't really quite feel like she fits in. And she doesn't feel like she fits in back home anymore, but not with the new home as well. And so it's about feeling in that space in between cultures and in between homes. The young girl's name in the book is Shanti. And so some of the questions I've asked are, how would you feel if you were Shanti? How do you think she felt after the boy made fun of her for not knowing what baseball is? There's so many questions that can come out of this book. I found my children actually are more likely in this one because it's a concept they don't really understand. We've mostly lived in the same place for all their lives. So, and the only other place we've lived was a very similar culture. And so it sparks a lot of questions and a lot of thought. So I really, really enjoy this one. There are a lot of books out there on racism. Some of them are young child appropriate. Sometimes I think maybe the book is not the way to go, and it's just about talking with your kids. This, for me, this book called Mixed, A Colorful Story, is a great first introduction to even just the concept of racism. And it's about the reds, the yellows, and the blues not liking one another and wanting to live separately until I think it's a blue and a yellow, they fall in love and they have a mixed baby who's green. And it's that sort of concept of really, really, really just basic racism introduction, and also the mixing of cultures. And at the end, they come together and they're much happier as they're all mixed together. And so I think some questions you might try are, how do you think you feel if you were a blue and a red, or if you were a blue and a red didn't like you because of your color? Do you think that the colors are more happy living separately or together, and why? Again, it doesn't go into too much depth, and I think there's far better books that do go into more depth. I just don't know if a child under the age of 3 or 4 could grasp some of those concepts. But I think once they get this, then you can start moving on to some of the other books. I will say this in as many groups as I can. I am a huge advocate of the Little People, Big Dreams books. These are but a few of them. I will say they are quite expensive. So I don't always tell people to go out and buy them, but if you can borrow them from your library, I think there's quite a few that you can actually that are read on YouTube videos if you just look up the names. But what I love about this is that each book features sort of a prominent person in history, and they use, all different genders, such diverse backgrounds. And even though not each book is touching on a social issue, a big thing for me is that, and I happen to have all women on this one, but it is women and men, but there's equal, so for my daughter, a big thing for her is she loves these books. Like, we read them all the time, many in a row, because she loves just hearing about really important women in history who went on to do really big things. And so these are just such a great way to start tons of different discussions, regardless of the person's history. There's one on Rosa Parks that she's in love with, and we've had so many discussions, and she asks the same question each time. I don't understand, why wasn't Rosa allowed to sit at the front of the bus? And I don't think she's going to grasp that concept for a while, but the fact that she keeps wanting to read it and she's really, really curious about it. In one of the other Little People Big Dreams books, I think it was Wilma Rudolph, they again introduced the concept that her parents had to drive a really long way on a bus and they'd have to sit at the back. And she was able to connect the same concept from the two books and saying, hey, and I was like, yeah, these happened around the same time. And so this was at a time when they couldn't ride at the front of the bus, or they would have to give up their seats. And so just the idea that she's kind of grasping it and connecting those two books together. I can't speak enough about these books, but I would probably go on for an hour if I just talked about them. So I didn't come up with any questions because each book is a little bit different. But like I've said quite a few times, I think just letting your children come up with their own questions and just introducing the concepts at this age is enough. So if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email us at admin@camry.ca or pspgroupsignup@camry.ca, or give us a call at 604-436-9449. Thank you so much for listening to this video today.